Good morning, everyone. I am Asha Nayaswami, and we are continuing now. Actually, we were joking. We're making a brief foray. What's foray? A brief foray into the subject at hand instead of away from it. The events of the last 2 days have distracted us from our predetermined purpose. But now I think we can go back to it, and this is exceedingly relevant. We're doing the way of Ananda Sanghis, the articulation of what it means to be part of Ananda. That's Swami wrote in 2003. So let's start with the prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master, Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, humbly we bow to you all. Beloved Swamiji, guide us as we study your words to receive on our deepest superconscious level the intention behind what you have written, that we may lift our vibration and become as you see us, children of God, beings of light, sharing with all the grace that we have received. Om, peace. Amen. So we've been working our way through the 7 points, the 7 main points, with the 7 sub-points on point number 2 of the 7 main points. It's as if I worked as a legal secretary for an extremely brief period of time. So I know about sub-paragraph condition number A under point number 2 and so on. So we are up to number 4, and I'm going to read it also with number 5 because they really go together. Number 3, just above it, was we seek never to convert anyone, but we try to inspire. And then the next 4 and 5 both deal with how do we regard the rest of the world. Because one of the great shortcomings of any particular spiritual path is that it narrows your focus. Now, it's okay to narrow your focus. As Swami puts it perfectly this way. If you have a lake and you have a sheet of ice over the lake and you want to reach the expansive lake underneath it, you can't just sort of pat it with your hand all over the place. He said you have to focus in one point and drill down through the ice. And once you drill through the ice, then you can enter the lake and then you can go anywhere. And sometimes people think that if all paths are one, if God is everywhere, why should I take discipleship? Why should I follow any one particular path? It's because we have to penetrate through that. That ice represents the layer of egoic delusion that confuses us. And unless we focus on one set of practices and one vibration with which we attune ourselves, it's really the vibration of attunement that powers the drill, so to speak, and we can penetrate through that layer of delusion, then we enter the same lake that anyone can enter from any point on that lake. But without that concentrated effort, we always remain on the surface. And whether this is a popular truth or not, if you can know the truth of something by its fruits. When Jesus was asked, how can you tell a true prophet from a false one? He gave a simple, very practical answer. By their fruits ye shall know them. A good tree gives good fruit, and a bad tree does not give good fruit. Many people at Ananda who live at Ananda have become committed. We're actually drawn to it by seeing the people who followed the path. And sometimes when people ask, how can I tell who my guru is? Sometimes, as in the case with Yogananda, and now even Swami Kriyananda is off of this earth, it's very difficult to evaluate a being whose consciousness is so much more elevated than ours, because we literally can't imagine what that reality is, and we tend to project our own limitations on it. But you can look at the people who follow the path, the ones who really have followed it with dedication and determination for a long time. And what you see in them, they are the fruit of that particular teaching. And if you like what you see, and if you feel a kinship with what you see, that's the kind of person I would like to be. That is a very strong indicator that this path is one that you would feel compatible with. And even if you don't yet know, about the guru or the masters who follow it, the people themselves, and that's what I've seen with many people at Ananda, their first draw was to the people they met. And then they wanted to find out what they were doing. As Swami Kriyananda said, if you meet people, the good people like the people of Ananda who are, well, in my humble and highly prejudiced opinion, are angels incarnate, you might think if you meet one or two of them somewhere that well, they're just a special person. But when you meet a whole community, and when you meet communities in many different parts of the world even, and they all have that same inner joy and inner freedom, as Swami said, you have to think it's what they're doing, because there just couldn't be that many that are so lucky. It's rather it's the fruit of the spiritual path. So moving on, it says, so I was starting to say, so one of the difficulties is you become narrow, and then you really can't see what's going on around you, or you're not kind to what's going on around you, because ours is the one true path. But Swami also wants to make it very clear that that is not the way of Ananda Sanghis. So point number 4 says, we seek fellowship with others willing to join hands with us in this loving labor for universal upliftment. Remember the prayer of the Ananda Sanghis, which I forgot to read this morning, was, may the divine light awaken and purify my heart and bring enlightenment to all beings. So we join hands and seek fellowship with others willing to join hands with us in this loving labor for universal upliftment. And not all spiritual paths are concerned with universal upliftment. Again, these are not things that can be taken for granted. Some feel that, working for one's own self-realization is enough, that the world is just a dream, and why should we concern ourselves with it? It's a valid point if that's attractive to you, but we join hands with those who are willing to work with us for universal upliftment. It doesn't have to be active cooperation, it's just sympathy. Thus, by our united efforts, our hope is to share inspiration with ever-increasing effectiveness. So the more people whose consciousness is focused on upliftment and on light and on universal brotherhood, the more we can start changing the energy of the planet from the level that matters, which is the level of consciousness, from the causal level of thought. In the last 2 days, when I've taken a brief foray away from the topic at hand, that's what I've been talking about, with the world becoming so agitated, so incredibly agitated at this time, with protests which have been peaceful, mostly done with the right consciousness, but then opportunists who have used the confusion of the moment to put forth extremely wrong consciousness. The more we can work together, whether it's just an acknowledgement across the plane of existence that these are kindred spirits. And through the course of many years of life at Ananda, I've met many, many people who are not part of this path, but are self-evidently kindred spirits, that we're all living in our own way, but we're living in attunement with the same fundamental principles. And the more we can recognize and unite with each other, even oddly enough, I accepted an invitation many years ago to appear on a panel before the California Association of Atheists. And they invited members of various religious groups. What on earth was it? Why were we there? I don't know, but they invited a series of all of us, we represented different religions. I don't remember the atheists actually speaking. I mean, now that I think about this, what possible reason did they have that? But anyway, there was this auditorium full of people who were all part of the Atheist Society, whatever their name actually was. And then there was about 5 or 6 of us who had to speak to them. It was just like, I'm blank. Like, what? Why would we have been speaking to them? Anyway, we were. And it was awful, is the actual only word I can use. The vibration in the room was awful. And they had like the state chairman or something like that there. And really, sometimes you see people and you think this is not actually a real person. This person is not actually what he purports to be. He's actually an actor who's been hired to play the part that he now purports to be. It's like costume and look and everything about him. He was the state chairman. He was all dressed in black, which it was just like too obvious to be all dressed in black. His hair was even dyed black. It was kind of stringy and the only word I can think of is evil looking. It's like if you wanted to get a villain. And he even had sort of a craggy, slightly fanatical expression in his face. He was something else. And everybody was, what I love I love stepping into another reality, which is a completely other karmic group. Ananda is this huge karmic group. And that's why we're so in tune with each other and so comfortable with each other. And you meet someone new and you feel like you've known them. We're this long-standing karmic group. And there's lots of others. Many years ago, when NASA's space program was really at its height, and it was centered in Houston, I was in Houston giving programs, and I went to the Space Center because it was a very interesting tour to take. As soon as I stepped on the campus, I was intensely conscious of the fact that, oh my gosh, this is a completely other karmic group. And now, if you refer to the talk I gave on Atlanteans and Indians and Romans, now, of course, I know they were Atlanteans who had been the big scientists before. And there was this buzz about the whole place and the way the people related to each other. And it was just marvelous. It's like, oh yeah, there's just all these circles of reality. And they all have their important people, their celebrities, and the groupies, and the hangers-on, in this inner circle, and perfect. And so there I was at the Atheist Society, and this was the celebrity, and having no teaching that would inspire him to uplift his ego or to transcend it, he merely reveled in it. This was the central casting aspect of the whole experience. He just sailed through being a caricature of the state chairman of the Atheist Society. I mean, it wasn't funny because the whole scene was so odd, but later it was very funny. I was just like, oh my gosh. Oh, I remember now, there was another celebrity there. This is a celebrity who was a lawyer, and he had been consistently suing the American government, trying to get God off of the few remaining places where God is. He was trying to get God off the money. I think it says, in God we trust on the money. I don't know whether he's succeeded now or not, but he was filing multiple lawsuits, and he gave a little report. He gave a little report to the group about his progress in getting the word God off the money. Incredible. We sat there watching people, cheer him and be so excited because he was doing it. So I don't remember who else. There might have been a rabbi, but there was I think he was Episcopal. And if he wasn't Episcopal, he was one of those very mainstream Christian things. There was a very fundamentalist Christian. There was me. And I don't know if there was anyone else. The mainstream Protestant guy tried really hard to make everybody the same, that the atheists in him were just the same. He was trying so hard to be liberal. He basically had no center at all. He was just trying to make sure that everybody felt included. I don't have any idea what I said. I don't recall. But what I remember about this is the fundamentalist guy and I just kept leaning into each other. And we talked sort of quietly because he also was conscious that we were in the presence of evil. And we both felt it. That was just, it was evil, not like these people were going to go and torture babies or anything like that, but the thought form that they all represented, which is there's nothing in this world that's worthwhile except what I want and the ego. And we're in charge and nobody else is in charge and we can exercise and do anything we want. Just ego, just pure, without any consciousness of being part of a greater reality. And as I've been saying in the last 2 days, this is the, Jyotish put it perfectly this morning. There's a corrective. What's happening is the cosmic forces have initiated a corrective to consciousness. And the consciousness of these people, this strong anti the idea that you should be devoted to something greater than yourself. And it just, there's no other word I can use. It was evil. So he and I just kind of hunkered together, and we'd actually even sort of whisper a little bit. And he told me a little bit about his story. I'm not quite sure how we managed that without being rude, but he told me he had retired from one of the tech jobs in the area and felt called by Christ to become a preacher, had studied to become a preacher, and now had a church across the water over in the East Bay. And and he knew what I was, and our teaching is not the same as theirs. They would try to convert us to understand that Jesus Christ is our one true Savior and the only Savior there is. But in that setting, we knew who the enemy was. And I even said to him, I said, this is really a wonderful experience, because normally you and I would not be on the same side of an issue. And he agreed that normally we would not be, but we were in the presence of what the real enemy was, which was those who deny the spiritual power of life altogether. So this is where I'm going again. We unite in fellowship and joining hands with all those who share our ideal of universal spiritual upliftment, and all other considerations really become small compared to that one reality. So then he says, just like there was another thought I had. Swami Kriyananda was in a discussion with the Bishop of Assisi a number of years ago, because when Ananda moved to Assisi, we had a mixed relationship with the Catholic Church there. And at one point, an article appeared in a magazine, a Catholic publication, excoriating Ananda for daring to, I don't know how they phrased it, the words I want to use is to take advantage of the blessings of Catholic saints like Francis and Clare, talking about how we were there in this holy land made sacred by St. Francis and St. Clare. They thought that was presumptuous on our part, since we weren't Christians by their definition, that we should imagine that we could draw the blessings of these saints. So Swami made an appointment to go talk to the bishop, who was a very conservative man. I don't know who the bishop is now. And they had a conversation about whether Swamiji and us could rightly be called Christians. The bishop defined Christians as the Catholic Church does, which the Catholic Church does not think that the Protestants are Christians or the others are Christians either. That you have to take the sacraments, you have to do this, you have to do this. I don't know, I'm not a Catholic. There's a number, there's more, Catholic is one of the largest represented, born into the family of denominations within Ananda. In Ananda Palo Alto, we've had a predominance of Catholics and Jews. And the Catholics in our church, the adult Catholics who are now light bearers for Ananda Church, if you touch them in the right place, they can start reciting the catechisms that they learned as children. It's just in there. And they can sort of all recite the catechisms because many of them grew up quite dedicated to Jesus through the church. But anyway, the bishop decided that Swami couldn't possibly be a Christian regardless. And so it wasn't an acrimonious meeting, but Swami was trying to find a point of harmony between them, and he wasn't successful in doing that. But finally, they both agreed that neither of them was the enemy. The enemy was the materialists. The enemy was those who denied the spiritual dimension of life at all. Now, I don't know if we can join hands in fellowship with that particular authority of the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church is huge and many people feel differently. But there are many kindred spirits. That's why that's the right thing. Not denominations and what they follow is not the point. Kindred spirits, those who are trying to live for God and trying to help the world by understanding that spirituality is the answer. So then he says, then we go farther. Number 5, we recognize that whether or not others join us consciously in this labor, all human beings, each one individually, serve the eternal purpose with a capital E and a capital P, the eternal purpose. Doing so by the simple act of seeking, whether ignorantly or wisely, the bliss of their own being. We condemn no one, therefore, for ideas he may hold that are different from our own, but embrace all as fellow seekers of ultimate bliss. This is an extremely important point. We are all equal in the eyes of God. When Swami was being severely persecuted by a group of very unscrupulous people, this was through our litigation years. Specifically, there was an attorney on the other side. All of this story is told in this book, my book of Swami's life. Swami just became very discouraged at one point. And so he went off to Hawaii for a couple of weeks just to recover from the sheer ugliness of the whole experience. And he was praying to Babaji. He said, why are you letting these adharmic people have so much power over me? And the answer that Babaji gave him was very simple. They are all my children. Just as simple as that. There's no aspect of creation that is not totally divine. I know that that's a very hard concept to grasp. And yesterday when I was talking about this does not mean that all equally are channels for the divine, because darkness also shadows through it, and people get swept up into the shadow. I was trying to remember, vanish the veils of, yes. When Master's, in his poem Samadhi, vanish the veils of light and shade, lifted every vapor of sorrow. He doesn't say light and darkness. It's light and shade. And shade is simply that something blocks the light. Darkness is the absence of light, but shade is just something diminishing the light. So not everyone, whether by the simple act of seeking the bliss of their own being, is how Swami writes, everyone serves the eternal purpose, because there's only one purpose in life. Everyone is seeking happiness. And by our seeking the happiness, which is our true nature, whether we seek it ignorantly or wisely, we are all fulfilling the eternal purpose of creation. The individual soul, the journey of the jiva, is from separation to union. And this is why we love one another. Not implied in what Swami says is that we can't treat everybody equally. Because if someone is caught in the shadow, then they need to have the appropriate consequences of being caught in the shadow. Yesterday, when I was talking about the civil unrest that we've been seeing around us a little bit, most of what we've been seeing is the appropriate response in a democracy. But there's also been this thread of dissonance and violence that's been trying to sort of work its way in there. And Master talked about there are always bullies. There are always going to be bullies, and bullies must be dealt with in a strong and forceful manner. You can't just say to a bully, oh, I love you because I know you're a child of God. And they are a child of God, but they're in the shade. They're in the shadow, and they have to receive the appropriate consequences of being in the shadow so they can begin to seek more wisely. And that's why when I was with those atheists, I actually I feel quite a lot of affection for them, but they're seeking foolishly. It's not going to work for them. You could see in the state chairman the result of the path that they were on, but they couldn't quite perceive it. Or in that lawyer who was just filled with ego. Is this really who we want to be? But there's no reason, there's no justification whatsoever for anything but love. But sometimes the love has to be expressed properly. So what Swami is saying is that first we will join hands with kindred spirits. But even if there are multitudes of people in this world who are not kindred spirits, we're all one in the light of God. And it's a beautiful teaching. This is the attitude of the Ananda Sanghi. Again, what he's writing here is not this is not an abstraction. This is, if you wish to embrace this ray of grace, if you wish to be a disciple of this path, if you wish to affiliate yourself with this community of souls that we call Ananda, then these are the principles that guide us. And we have to, this is how, when I don't know how to behave, I have to think about this. If one becomes hateful toward people who are caught in the shadows, just enraged at them, which is not hard to do. And some of what's been happening in the last day or two because of, the demonstration of abuse of power on a very high level, this anger and negativity is unleashed. Stern measures can be unleashed, but they don't have to be backed by wrong consciousness. Because if we start responding with wrong consciousness, then we have suddenly begun to contribute. We are contributing to the delusions that are trying to be corrected. And this is vital, and that's why Swami writes this in here. We look at someone and you realize they're foolish in their search for bliss, because you see, everybody does what they think is going to make them happy. People have two motivations. Master wrote this in Science of Religion. Swami rewrote it into the book. God is for everyone. Everyone has two motivations: to escape suffering, to increase happiness. It's a very interesting template to lay over your own behavior or the behavior of anyone else. No matter how misguided and foolish the action, to become a murderer or a thief or a heroin addict or a fierce dictator or a brutal guard or something like that, the person is doing it because somehow it makes them feel happy to behave that way, or diminishes their suffering. Perhaps many people who are brutal to others have been brutalized themselves, and they carry within them this rage that has never been able to be expressed because perhaps they were children and the force that was brutalizing them was so much bigger than them. So suddenly they get a position of power and all that rage comes out. And there's this tremendous sense of relief and justice finally being done. And so they think it's going to decrease their suffering and make them happier. Of course, it's a false teaching because we are a part of all that is, but they're in the shadow. They don't know that. So it would be natural to be angry, especially if that brutality is directed toward you or toward someone you love or to your people as you define them. But as soon as we become angry, we have joined the shadow, because, as Babaji said, they are all my children. Now, to be naive and say, oh, we'll just love them, we don't have to take any action, that's just naive. Action has to be taken, but hatred doesn't have to be a part of it. It's really as simple as that. Corrie ten Boom, whose family was betrayed, they were sheltering Jews in the Second World War in Amsterdam. They were Christians. They were sheltering Jews. They were betrayed. They were arrested. Her sister died, and her father died because of the arrest. She survived. After the war, she had to stand in front of the person who had betrayed them, who himself had caused all her suffering and the death of her sister and her father. And she stood there, and he wanted her to forgive him. And she said, she just prayed desperately. She said, Jesus, I can't, but you can. And then she said she sort of felt her hand going up, not of its own accord, and she shook his hand. And she felt Jesus's consciousness. They are all my children. But she was honest enough to say, I can't, but you can. Because she knew there was no, if she couldn't forgive him, she became part of the shadow, and her desire was to become part of the light. This is not easy, but no one said the path of self-realization would be easy. But it's very clear. And it's something that we can all aspire to and guide our lives to and return to as we fall into the shadow and then pull ourselves back again. God bless you.